I really haven't commented about the Ukrainian slash Russian situation. I did comment about Rand Paul and how I disagree with what Rand Paul was calling for sanctions and other actions against Russia and Putin. And if you want to look at this one article from April 25th, 2005, I remember reading about it in a book, but here's the article. Putin, Soviet collapse a genuine tragedy. Russian President Vladimir Putin told the nation Monday that the collapse of the Soviet Union, or the Soviet Empire, was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century, and had fostered separatist movements inside Russia. In his annual State of the Union, or annual State of the Nation address to Parliament and the country's top political leaders, Putin said that the Soviet collapse also was a tragedy for Russians. First and foremost, it is worth acknowledging that the demise of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. Putin said, as for the Russian people, it became a genuine tragedy. Tens of millions of our fellow citizens and countrymen found themselves beyond the fringes of Russian territory. And then he goes on and on and on. And if you want to look at what's going on right now in Ukraine and how you have many people in that country actually are technically Russian, right? This shows you what's going on in the mindset of Putin himself. And if you want to take it a step further, let's just look at it from a geopolitical perspective. Alright, this article now is from harpers.org, and it's most likely reviewing a book by neoconservative Robert Kagan, and it's called The World America Made. And I don't agree with this author of what he talks about. I used to at one point, like 2007, 2008. I used to read a lot of this type of work. But if you want to look at the situation going on in Russia, let's go to right over here. It's talking about what's going on, first of all, in the book called It's a Wonderful Life. And let's start from here. As Kagan sees it, America's impact on history mirrors George Bailey's impact on Bedford Falls. Thanks to the power yielded by the United States, the entire post-war era has been a golden age for humanity. Among the hallmarks of this golden age have been the spread of democracy, a huge reduction in world poverty, and above all, the absence of war among great powers. All of this Kagan ascribes to the United States and to what he calls the American world order. Accept any diminution of American prominence, and you could kiss the golden age goodbye. Just like Bedford Falls, without George Bailey, the world will eventually become a dark and miserable place. Upstart nations will demand particular spheres of influence. This is the important part. Notice, once again, I don't agree with everything this author talks about, but let's just get into this now. Upstart nations will demand particular spheres of influence, and the weakened United States will have little choice but to retrench and cede some influence. China, Russia, India, and others will begin flexing their expansionist muscles, with doom and gloom sure to follow. The notion that the world could make a smooth and entirely peaceful transition to a new order, Kagan writes, is mere wishful thinking. Now, this was written a few years ago, and it's coming into hand right now, especially with what's going on in Ukraine, right? You see Ukraine ready to blow up. Crimea eventually will be annexed, or Russia will annex it, and it will become part of Russia. So you're seeing one of these countries, Russia, flexing their muscles, right? So this is the sphere of influence, number one, or Russia's sphere of influence, number one, is increasing, while the United States' power is declining. That's an important fact that we need to get out there, especially with we continue to run all these deficits. America has many problems at home. Obama's a weakened president, so on and so on. And then I see this on Yahoo News, like today. West readies sanctions on Russia after Crimea vote. Let's read a little bit of this. headed into a meeting in London, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov each said they were glad to talk before the Sunday referendum in Crimea. The vote on the strategic Black Sea Peninsula of 2 million people is widely expected to back secession and potentially annexation with Russia. The US and EU say the Crimean vote violates Ukrainian's constitution and international law, while Russia has said it will respect the results of the referendum. The new government in Kiev believes the vote is illegal, but Moscow says it does not recognize the new government's leader as legitimate. If Crimea secedes, the United States and European Union plan to slap sanctions as early as Monday on Russian officials and businesses accused of escalating the crisis and undermining Ukraine's new government. Okay, first of all, these sanctions aren't as bad as what I originally thought, but at the same time, if you're going to start stuff with Putin, right, regardless of whether we agree with what he's doing or not, I personally think that he's nuts. He's crazy. But regardless of that, if Barry and Kerry want to go ahead and start stuff with Russia, they're going to put up a fight. There's no doubt that, there's no doubt about that beyond a shadow of a doubt, in my opinion. And long story short, I grew up with some individuals who had parents. It actually immigrated like in 1990-ish, right after the fall of the Soviet Union. So I grew up with some Ukrainians and Russians, right? I understood how their culture worked. I mean, many people, they probably don't have any Russian or Ukrainian friends or friends from the Eastern Bloc. I mean, they weren't my friends, but I hung out with them quite a bit. I mean, I don't want to stereotype any group or whatever, but I just got a glimpse of how their culture is like. And all I know is that if the United States wants to start stuff with Russia right now, especially with how we are in a weakened state, this probably is not going to be great for the United States. Long story short. And the only people in the media or in politics that makes sense. Ron Paul is not in politics anymore, but his analysis is right. Don't do anything. Michael Savage, conservative talk show host, also makes sense. Like, you have to be crazy if you want to escalate tensions with Russia. Speaking of sanctions, and now tying it back to the Russian stock market index, I don't believe that sanctions are the right way to go. Because ultimately, what's going to end up happening is if markets sense geopolitical tension, the markets in Russia are going to go down. I mean, here's the deal. First of all, yeah, there's a threat of sanctions. That's part of the reason why the stock market in Russia has been down close to, 20% since the beginning of the year. That's pretty insane. So if you look at that, what else are investors going to fear? They don't want to deal with all sorts of fanky-panky going on in Russia. Sanctions or no sanctions, right? They want clarity. They want to know what's going on. So that's why you're going to see most likely cash on the sidelines or shorting the market or selling of these various stock indexes. So that's why I think that, first of all, sanctions are a bad idea because free market forces are going to take hold and you're going to continue to see the MICX index go down. Long story short, if we do see Crimea becoming part of Russia, we're going to see sanctions, in my opinion. Russia is going to retaliate, knowing the leadership, knowing the culture and the leaders and all that stuff. So if you see more sanctions enacted, Russia is going to retaliate, and now we're going to see how Obama and Kerry, or Barry and Kerry, are going to react. And in my opinion, they're going to take some more actions. And then what's quite interesting, the Russians are going to say, okay, we're going to continue to dump more treasuries. I think they sold a significant amount of their treasuries. Even though it's 1%, that just shows the world that, hey, if Russia's going to dump bonds, who else is going to dump bonds? So that's something that I'm looking at right now. Hopefully cooler heads prevail and we don't start to see these guys having another Cold War or potentially much worse. We see Russia dumping treasuries, and then China just says, hey, you know what? We're going to dump some of these treasuries because we don't like how they're treating our ally Russia. So there are a lot of things going on. China is having problems in the credit markets, right? These guys don't want to lend to each other. Red flag, just like we saw in 2007, 2008. Geopolitical concern in Russia. And we have crazy policies going on with this administration. And don't get me wrong, both parties are making the wrong move. In my opinion, don't do anything because ultimately you're going to have capital flight, and long story short, Russia is going to have to bite the bullet. But if they see the United States as provoking them into doing some sort of stupid action, then guess what? We're going to have to pay for it, whether we like it or not. So anyway, this is my take on Russia, Ukraine, and the whole situation. Hopefully, cooler heads are going to prevail. However, it seems the way that it's going right now doesn't look like it. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you later. Bye.